Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Painting Cruel Seas. This time we've got a US landing craft right here in LCI, and I've got a few reference pictures that I'm going to show you here real quick. We got this one. This is actually a color ref that I found. Now this might have been post-war, immediate post-war, something like that. Surrounded by ice. You can't really see that because I cropped it down. But as I bring up this other reference right here, this could be more interesting, especially for rust and other things, than our straight up gray reference over here. I am going to use that. I'm going to make it even a little bit bigger, obviously, so we can make sure that our gunners and everything at least have some of the right colors on them. We're going to try and do the weathering and the chipping and all that kind of stuff there. Let's reduce those down back out of the way. We'll bring those up every now and then as we need them. So you got the usual things here where the gunners have their own crew, and then there's always these three-man little bundles here of the metal figs. I try to chop those off. So here we've got these two up here on the bridge. Took the third one, threw it down here on the deck. Now these, we'll try and maybe make these wood. We'll try and make these barrels. We'll see what we can do in the time allotted with that. We do want to get into some of the weathering, and we are going to stick with some of the usual Reaper paints here. So blue and brown liner, our maggot white and mint green for obvious reasons. We might even toss in a little bit of the clear blue, see if we can make that sort of greenish teal color for the lower area of the hull. We're also going to throw in a couple of contrast paints here. Actually, the Gore Grunter fur, when you mix it with the Leviathan blue, you get a really nice, deep sort of a bluish brown, depending on how much of this is in there. And then, I think before we might have used Fire Slayer flesh, but we'll try this as a base, potentially for some rust streaks and other things like that. And I think that one went back to the Verposten boat, the German ship that we did. Now I have two other videos. I've got the Verposten boat and also right here, the Gabbiano class corvette. We did that in another episode, part of my barbershop navy, as I like to call it there. Had a lot of fun with the Italian ships, especially that Gabbiano class corvette. I'm going to go into some of the reference pictures again. So see that picture, the one color over there? For whatever reason, it just seemed fun to target that. Obviously, you see a million different versions of these. Now, there's another one. See that black and white one over there? That's towards the left. That also has that two-tone hull to it. I just thought that might be a lot of fun to try. I'm going to keep the material simple. Not going to get too crazy. We will go with our usual craft brushes here. You can see when you get one that's a little bit newer, a little bit more of a point on it. And we've got the same brush, but this one's been used a little more worn down. It's a filbert brush, but a custom-made one. Look at that. So the point, virtually the same on the two, but we also have, and this is real helpful for a project like this, we have this filbert edge. I think we're just going to stick with water here for the most part as our thin. I've played around with the Lamian medium and the Green Stuff World Master medium. But we want to do these rust streaks like we've got here on the Corvette. Chipping-ish, maybe. We'll do that here and there. But let's see what we can do in the time allotted. What we'll do is get our paint out on the palette, and we'll be right back. Let's get into this now with some initial glazes here. We got our blue liner over here, brown liner here, sepia liner over there. Then we got the mint green, maggot white, clear blue over here, a little clear orange over there. That's what we're going to fool around with when it comes time for some stuff going on with the deck and the rust and that sort of thing. Speaking of that, we also have our, that's the Gore Grunter flesh over there. We got Leviathan blue over here. And we're going to use all of these together. Now, when you use, let's say, something like the blue liner, Leviathan blue together, instead of having to use, say, the contrast medium to thin things down, now you can dive into your water. a little bit. And what we'll do is we'll work on the upper levels here first. I am actually going to throw in just a little touch of the little touch of that mint green in there. It is going to make it a little less transparent. Now I'm going to look at the deck here of this reference real quick. Okay, just wanted to make sure. I did not think that was going to be a teak deck or anything like that. Just wanted to be sure. So for the heck of it, we are just going to get started up here. Now remember, this is just a real quick kind of addition to the shading that we did with the primer. Same old Badger Steiner Res primer, like always. And I'll show you a jar here in a second. Once we're pretty well along with this, we'll go back and show you that. Now, the Leviathan blue, that has a little bit more of a reddishness to it. The blue liner, a little bit more of a greenish to it. We're just going to use two of those together. This does not have to be any sort of neat, special, whatever. I gotta figure out actually what these things are. If these are just crates, what we got going on here. Okay, I'm gonna make that reference a little bit bigger here. Now I'm just showing metal. Maybe almost something like a Pioneer tool container, something like that. Something that would just hold tools. With some of the British Matildas had that, I think. Some of the Russian tanks had that too. Here, let's just go into this. Doesn't really matter. Again, does not have to be 100% coverage here. And here, I'll just show you real quick. This is the Badger Steiner Res right there. Doesn't have to be neat. All we're trying to do is just throw in some darks. We might even throw a little bit of brown liner here, especially this stuff on the deck. We can also take the makeup sponge and remove paint like we've done before. Stuff like this. But all we're trying to do here is just get in some of our darks right away. I know this is not the usual method that most vehicle painters use. It's usually a very neat and tidy 15-step process or whatever, and they're using gloss things between stages and everything else. This is just not that way. This is the way I paint my bolt action stuff. And I actually have, at least 3-4 vehicle painting tutorials. I could maybe even, in the description, throw you some links there. At the end of this, towards the end here, you will find some links to the Gabbiano class Corvette and that Verpostenboot. I'm just going to pronounce it that way because I like the sound of that. Heck, I might even throw in a little bit of my sepia liner here. The idea is just to keep changing the color here. Let's just keep blasting away with this. And I know folks say, well, why wouldn't you just shade it all with the primer and then use filters or something like that, some nice neat approach? Well, you can do that. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that approach. But it is it's going to take a lot longer because all those Italian ships that you saw, a bunch of those were just painted at a convention. They were painted at Little Wars. And you can't do that. Well, certainly in my little 2-foot by 2-foot space that I had at the convention, in a dealer's room, in not ideal lighting, you have a real tough time trying to do something like that, where you're just doing that neat little approach and you're you're varnishing between layers and all that. Well, that really wasn't possible. And not all of you have the time to deal with that. You want to get your, if a fleet, 6 to 8 ships generally, something like that, you want to get those out on the table as soon as possible. Now, that's, like I said, if you're just doing one vehicle, fine, whatever. But we're talking about fleets here. You're not just working on one ship, you're working on entire fleets. And you can see we're just letting all that stuff kind of mix together, doing it real fast. You can always go back in later. Now I could still do the thing with the makeup sponge, but this time around I'm just not going to do that. Just going to let this be dark underneath here. And we'll work back. Again, just working really fast here. I think at a certain point I might just try, if I do these in oils, I think people might be even more shocked, because it's not going to be one of those things where, okay, we do the oils and then we let them dry. No, it's not going to be like that at all. We're actually just going to forge straight ahead just like we are now, but with oils. And I'm going to grab a little more of that sepia liner there for some of this action here on the stern. Sometimes these ships can be a little bit of a challenge to get on screen. The smaller ones, like the Higgins boats and that sort of thing, those will be a little bit easier. I do have those. I've got one, sort of a test, color test figure. That one's just about ready to go. I don't think I'm going to get into the decals of the flag on this because, well, decals are decals, and actually I kind of hate decals. I'd rather just take a piece of paper, stick it on there, bend it a little bit, and just paint and freehand the thing on. Because to me, decals are just always such a pain. You can use all the decal fixer you want, and the micro, the micro saw or whatever, that's supposed to kind of weaken it and sort of melt it over a curved surface or over panel lines. Micro saw, that's what it is. Or is it well, some call it micro saw. I think other companies, they call it micro set. 6 of one, half dozen of the other. But in any case, now we've got this pretty well darkened up, and now we can maybe get in here with some of our lighter bluish gray, which is just going to happen to be so close to what's in that photo. And it's also very similar to the bluish gray that I used on our Gabbiano class Corvette. You can see that's got a fair amount of paint in it, not a dry brush or anything like that. Now, if you're not necessarily comfortable doing this sort of wet in the wet stuff, you don't have to, and you can let it dry. You do as much of these techniques or as little as you want. It is your ship after all. But the general idea is I'm going to sort of work my way through, figure out what maybe needs to, what I need to accentuate more, and other areas where, okay, I'm going to do a bunch of weathering over here. Do I really need to obsess with smooth blends? In some ways here, working wet into wet can help you achieve some of those smoother blends. And I have to determine, okay, is this where my demarcation line's going to be? And it seems that way. So I just double check my one reference over there, and yeah. And I know people, they're not used to working with the bigger brushes like this. They're just not quite used to it, and it sort of is intimidating. And maybe at first it is, but after a while you just sort of get used to the bigger brush and you're more used to what the thing can do as opposed to maybe what you think it can't do. Now it's also obviously the winter time here, so paint's going to dry a little bit differently than say it would here over the summer when it's super warm and humid and everything else. That can affect your timing on glazes and those sort of things, but when I saw in that reference picture, these are supposed to be just metal, so we will not make them wooden crates. We'll make those wooden crates if we can. Again, just because I have my colors out on the palette here, it just means that I can sort of mix at will. And I know people, they like to find just the right gray and then the right color to highlight that gray and everything else, which that's fine until maybe that color stops being made and now you've been relying on something that doesn't exist anymore. And it can just be a pain finding those colors anyway, because we used to do that same thing. We would look for the skin tone highlight color or the next level of red or whatever, and boy, we just never could find those. I know there's the paint sets, and Vallejo has them, and where it's the Panzer Grenadier set or the this that or that set, whatever, that's supposed to just be here's all the colors right here in these jars magically for you to use, and sort of like that, kinda. That's an interesting looking winch over there. The only color that's not something in the range of blue is just those, pretty much those two little life rafts, and that's it. Interesting to see the anchor back here. I assume maybe that's for making sure you don't get run up on shore too far and can't get back off again. And there might be some things here where it's too hard for you to see anyway. I try to basically show the whole process, not do a whole bunch of off-camera things, because, well, at a certain point, what use is that if you come back and, oh look, there's half of the thing was painted, didn't get to see it. Not sure what value there is in that. Like I said, some of these areas, like here, where we still have a lot of our initial washes that are wet, maybe we let those dry a little bit and we'll just go on to other areas here. And I'm just seeing, as I look at all the reference pictures, the deck just shows as being that same bluish gray metal color. You can see it wasn't terribly hard here to just pick a color and sort of match what we saw in our reference picture there. Also keeping in mind that, well, we'll be doing some rust on these, and I'm sure these probably maybe had a little bit more of it than, say, an average ship, because, well, just the nature of the beast here. It's sort of a de facto cargo ship, practically. So what I'm going to do is let some of that just dry for the heck of it, and let's play around with our lower hull here. So we're actually going to take some of our blue line, clear blue, and then we are going to take touch of that sepia liner, because remember it's kind of a greenish teal blue. We're going to mix that. Got a little bit of our brown liner in there too. And we'll hit that right along here. So instead of driving yourself crazy just trying to find that right shade of bluish green, well, you take some blue, you take some yellow, you make your own green, and then you're good to go. Let's swing around this way and keep going. You can see how many times I've cleaned the brush, which is pretty much 0 at this point. But right away, in just the first few minutes here, what have we been able to do? We've been able to establish just, in general, some light, some dark, and the colors that are involved here. We've got our secondary hull line there. Go back to this, and now the upper hull, the lights are going to be more like that mint green right there. What we are doing is we're just taking this, mixing what we used from our initial wash, letting that get mixed into our mint green. You can see I'm using the brush on its side, make it even bigger now. Nice, long, broad brush stroke. Some of our machine gun mounts here. And like I said, if the paint around it's too wet, I move to another area. It's not that big a deal. I do just have to keep in mind where that lower hull is, and remember, don't hit it with the lighter upper hull mix here. Been tempted a few times to do that, and then had to stop myself. And here you can start to see where we're getting closer to maybe that final color. You notice there's no white out on the palette. I probably at some point might grab some Maiden Flesh, but even that, the little bit of skin tone that needs to be done on these guys, or I could just take the yellow, some of that Gore Grunter fur, and some of this maggot white, and essentially mix my own skin tone, because how much skin tone is there? There's not that much. There's not much of that to deal with here on this. And you can see how we're using the brush like that filbert brush that I talked about. Using that flat surface there. If you watch some of those other vehicles, the Charbie and that sort of thing, you can see how we use that filbert shape, that flattened shape of the brush to our advantage. And something I can do, I can pull that in. Look at, we can spread out that brush. Eventually, as we work our way into some subsequent lighter layers, we're going to see more brush strokes like this. See how it's a vertical brush stroke? Even on the machine gun mounts here. And I did this on the Gabbiano class Corvette. Done it on all of the ships, and basic reason for that is you sort of set up things like streaking, because there's the rush streaks, but then you should probably also have just some natural streaks, like almost some stains, some like saltwater stains or whatever, or freshwater stains, instead of always just rust. Now, if I had a blow dryer, or a hair dryer, something like that, I could hit this too. That would have dried it out. But that's kind of noisy. And I just wanted to keep the line moving here. Again, using that vertical brush stroke there, we've got our anchor. That's going to get a hefty amount of, I think, some rust and chipping, just for obvious reasons. Anything on the bow of this thing here where you're getting close to your ramps and such, there's going to be a lot of activity there. What I also try and do is break these down into segments that are somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 minutes long, so when they get to be around that time, that's when I just sort of stop that segment and start up with the next one. So we're going to do the same thing we did on the port side. Going to do that on the starboard side here. Already starting to think of those vertical brushstrokes, because as this dries, it really does, especially with we're pulling up some of that darker initial glaze like that, it starts to actually become more of a stain as opposed to just a smear. Like I said, as long as I got that mint green sitting there, I can take some of that, pull that out. And I'll show you something real quick here as we work on that deck. Let's take a look at the deck of the... Now there's going to maybe be a little bit of dust on this. But you can see how we got some of that, the rust and the staining there on the deck. That's why I'm not worried about getting this color absolutely everywhere across the deck, especially when it gets close to something like the bridge tower here. Because that's where all of that rust and such can save you a bunch of time. And I might throw some more of the mint green out there too. That's it. Just as I need some more, I can just pull that, get it into my mix. Once again, just going to keep pulling this up here. And you'll see more and more of these vertical brush strokes like this. Now the stern here is a little bit drier. I can start to get in there with that deck color, which, like I said, we'll just go as being the same as the upper hull color. And just not gonna fret about that being super neat, because we're gonna go back in with our rust. And as I pick up some of that, what would you say, the dirty wash color or whatever, well, this starts to mix into my mint green. Makes it a little bit darker in some areas. I think now I can finally start to get some of that mint green down into there. Get the front part of the deck here. Don't want to forget these guys. I was just waiting for those to get a little bit more dry. I think there's going to be a hefty amount of weathering there too. I can just see this as being much more heavily weathered. I think there's going to be a lot more activity, people tramping around the deck here, whereas on typical kind of warship, not a lot of people crawling on top of turrets necessarily. it's interesting. Yeah, this is that's maybe a couple inches shorter than the Corvette. So, what at 1/350 scale? Trying to think of maybe a good 35, 40 feet shorter, something like that, than the Corvette. I do enjoy tackling these larger ships. I've got the largest ship of all the fleets. I've got the Minesweeper. I think there's a mine layer. So we'll work our way through all of these. And you can get the general idea here as we're just lightening this up. So what I'm going to do is in a few minutes here, I do want to go back in here and again some sepia liner with that clear blue. I could do this with GW paint as well. I just happen to have my Reaper paints. So I'm hitting that with that sort of bluish green color again, slightly lighter. Like so. And then real quick, I'm just gonna drop some sepia liner here on these lifeboats because I'm gonna assume that the interior of these is some kind of wood, and then we'll get the yellow around the outside afterwards. And just while I've got it, I'm gonna think about these crates over here. Might even grab a little bit of that gore grunta there to give it a little bit more of a reddish look to it. And I'll probably throw some more of my mint green out there as well. I think you can see as it starts to dry, you can see with each of these, and I'm not intentionally, or I am intentionally, maybe even skipping an area. And they say always skip that. That's what I did on the sides of all those Italian ships. They were roughly about this color on the hull. And it looked like all of this extra work was done to achieve those streaks, and there was no extra work. It was because we made it part of the painting process, we didn't have to do any kind of extra thing tacked onto it later. It was part of the painting process, so no need to go in there afterwards and try and apply that texture. It was just sort of applied as we were working the paint. And this winch, I can see this being really beat up here, probably getting a whole lot of the chipping and other such things. We are just about out of our mint green here. So what I will do is I'll get some more out on the palette here, let some things dry. Then we'll start to add some more lights, maybe even get some yellow out on the palette here so that we can do these life rafts. I think we're going to start thinking about the crew probably not this next stage, but maybe the stage after that. We'll start to play around with details like the crew. And then typically the weathering stuff is among the last things that I do. Again, you can see what those vertical brush strokes start to do. So we'll get more mint green out on the palette, and we will be right back. What we're going to do is continue adding a little more lights here. Now I've got my brown liner. I've even got a little bit of my maggot white that I'm going to mix in, but you can see where instead of the blue, say like the blue liner or the Leviathan blue and the mint green, we're actually taking a brown liner and the mint green. We're mixing those together. Still got our filbert brush here, but this is where we can give this just a little bit of a warmer gray hint in some places. We're not going to do this everywhere. We'll do it in some places. Little subtle thing. It's going to give us a little more variety. This is the kind of stuff you just can't do with, let's say we had done some airbrushing stuff and we had airbrushed this a certain, oh heck, maybe we airbrushed it mint green or something like that. Well, it would have been really tough to do these, again, these sort of linear streaking things, this slightly different, again, warmer tone like this, especially here on the deck. Because the airbrush stuff, well, yeah, it does real well at making that smooth, perfectly fine surface, but, well, the deck of this ship is not going to be perfectly smooth and fine, and there should be, to try and make it look bigger, you're trying to change the color of it here and there, where in some parts it's a little bit more of a warmer gray, other parts it's more of a cooler gray. Depends if it's reflecting the colors of the waves or not. Maybe it's an overcast day. So there's different reasons why you're not necessarily just going to have that same generic blue color everywhere. You can see here there's more and more of the brown liner is getting in there. And that's the same, yeah, right here you can see some of that. But then there's other areas, maybe we'll have a little bit more of the mint green, and that'll make it a little bit lighter, a little more blue. Let's get the top edge of our bridge here too, and some of our machine gun mounts. There. And you notice almost virtually every single brushstroke now at this point is this vertical type of a brushstroke. I also have to think, because weathering, and if you watch some of those vehicle painting videos, the weathering really is like a chess game. You sort of have to plan things out in advance. Have to say, well, okay, if I want some chipping to go here, well, it's best to have a lighter color there. If I want to have some streaking there, heck, even some of our original washes and glazes are still dry. And I'm going to add some of that maggot white to this. It'll lighten it up in a few spots. We don't want to go too light with this, because I think the more, if this was bigger, we could do a little bit more with our shading, but it's kind of a weird situation where, well, these things are so small we have to accentuate the shading because they just don't have enough of it on their own because they're so small. But if we emphasize it too much, it's one thing if it's just I don't want to say, well, a figure of a human or whatever, but when it's a vehicle, and sometimes you go crazy with the shading. I've seen it happen with tanks and trucks and other such things. And because so much shading was done, it looked a little bit more like just a toy as opposed to maybe something that was real but just smaller. I don't know if that necessarily describes it as well as I would like. But here we again doing these vertical strokes, and just added a touch of that maggot white to it. But you can see we don't do it universally everywhere. We do a few, and we sort of stop. And then now here I'm thinking that I want some kind of a little bit of a shadow there. That's where we're going a little bit lighter with this. On the other side of it, maybe. Because you have to figure this is facing down towards the water, so it makes sense that it would not be quite as light. Well, like I said, we're fooling around with adding these lights here. Let's hit these things right here. Get those a little bit lighter now with those glazes and such dry down in here. It's going to sort of scumble the paint a little bit. You wouldn't want to do that with a real expensive brush. These things are just, gosh, about 35 cents a piece maybe. They come in a package of 12. I get them from Hobby Lobby. These days, you usually just get them from the Hobby Lobby website. They don't have to be these specifically. There's a lot of sort of synthetic style watercolor / craft brushes that yield a pretty similar result, because I've even gotten other things besides just these and used those. So I think now is that, yeah. See, let's hold it this way. And you can start to see how that's a little bit lighter than what's around it. And we're just going to then leave it there. Not going to keep going with that. Do a few of these in it and leave it. It's giving us, as I said, that sort of default weathering, default streaking. I guess however you wanted to phrase it. And over here we're going to do that scumbling again. Because remember, we have our weathering yet to go. Debating on, should that be done sooner rather than later? You know, before I do the crew. I'm actually tempted to do it before the crew now. So I think that's what we'll probably do. What I am also going to do, now we're going to use maybe our less beat up version of this brush here. Some of our masked details and a few of these guys here. So yeah, I think we might start to work on our rust here. We also have some yellow out on the palette here. Oh, let's get some of that sepia liner into that. Maybe a touch more. Let's just hit these over here real quick. You can see now, I just wanted to get all the stuff around those done first. Now we can get this, we get the yellow more intense with additional layers, but for right now, here, let's see if we can't, through just a few little impressions of some wood here. Now we've got our crates over here. Let's go after these guys a touch. Now what I may do with the crew is just throw some basic, real quick colors on them here. And these crates, we're going to hit those again. Now I was tempted to make them almost more of a greenish color. I don't think I saw those in any of the references. I'm going to double check here. We're going to bring this up. They don't really, yeah, they are pretty, well, they show them as kind of a, I just saw they're kind of a darker brown. So maybe this is about as light as it's going to get. Like that. Gonna go back into my yellow mix here. We'll hit this. So keep working with the bigger brushes as long as possible. Now, let's see what we want to do. I'm going to make this reference bigger so I can see. I'm looking at the number there. Ah, that's interesting. We actually have a dark blue. I might try that on my ridge of that. That could actually be fun. So I'm going to move that back. Yeah, well, maybe we'll make that darker there just for the heck of it. Gonna throw a few quick little lights on that anchor there. This winch. We'll be doing some more glazing onto that stuff. Don't worry about that. You also have to realize that there are times where, okay, we'll do this part next, and I have to switch gears. Sometimes you have to be willing to just sort of say, you know what, I think we need to hit this next. You have to be flexible enough to do that. Just let the plan change a little bit. You have your basic outline, but there are times where, especially if it's something like this, it's not like you're going to be painting 20 of these. And I try not to do things that I've painted a bunch of times, because what happens there is that you end up with the, you've done it so many times, you're so familiar with it, you have this whole step-by-step plan that you can do real easy, and it makes it seem to people that maybe haven't painted it before, then they try and do it themselves, and they say, holy smokes, that was way harder for me. Well, yeah, of course it was, because you've done it 10 times, they haven't done it at all yet. So I try to avoid practicing and practicing and practicing in advance. I think it just makes it, as I have to figure out, well, how the heck am I going to do this? Makes it a little bit easier for you guys then maybe to say, oh, okay, yeah. I don't necessarily just kind of start out knowing exactly how I should paint all of these things. So let's just find ourselves kind of a uniform color. So we're obviously going to go kind of a darker bluish gray on the pants. We've got that lighter blue, just because we're not doing dungarees on the top there. Let's get ourselves some. Yeah, I need just a touch of that. What's left of that mint green there. And I'm gonna double check what the life vests are, but right now I just wanted to hit some blue. We're blocking this in just like we did on the rest of the ship, because I will go in with some glazes on top of these here. And I realize all of this to some folks, wow, that really looks just haphazard and messy and everything else. Well, the ship looked that way too, and then all of a sudden it started to not quite look that way once we started to refine a little bit here and there. And there's a bunch of these little crew guys here. And it's best not to, because you'll get bored. What will happen is you just won't want to paint them at all. You might not include them because you say, you know what, there's just no way to do those guys in a quick enough way, but yet still get a decent enough result on them. I think that gets all of our crew there real quick. Because if we're going to throw in any kind of rust stuff over the top of that, we'll just end up having to repaint them anyways. Now let's see. I want to just see how big I'm going to just do a quick little test over here. And yeah, that's still the gigantic craft brush that we're doing this with. I think that went this way. There's my 3. Yeah, that's about... Now, of course, you know what? I did it in the wrong spot. So, tragedy of tragedies, or not. It just goes away. I'm seeing that I needed to do that in a different spot. Let's do this on the other side. Interesting. So that's got to go up here. That's those changes that said you have to be willing to make. Wasn't all that hard. We can do that again right over here, only this time we'll do it in the right spot. That's more like it. Okay. While we're dealing with this blue over here, let's take a slightly lighter version of it. We're still making that into a bluish green here. But much like those vertical lines that we did on the other upper surface of the hull, we're going to do those here now. You have to figure too, okay, yeah, it's part of it is it was painted this way, but then you also have the water that you're trying to reflect into this area. So I'm just giving it a little bit of a distinctive color here. It's a little more difficult in some parts of this to do the vertical stuff because we have these different little ridge lines here. Yeah, I did like that darker element there up across on the top part of the bridge. So let's do that, because that was kind of neat looking. And it's obviously a historical photo anyways, so there, make just a bit. I think that gives us a little extra distinction there on our conning tower bridge type deal. Lighten this up here. Again, we're going to go with use some of the clear yellow there to lighten that into more of a teal, and where possible, again, see how we're doing these vertical strokes like this. It's not always possible. So here I'm just going to lay the brush on its side for the most part. Sort of dab that in. Not everywhere. A little more. Towards the bow. Let's see if we can pop that number back over here again. Only this time in the right place. The other nice thing about when you do this first, let's say the number just doesn't quite end up as clean as you wanted it or something like that. Well, you just hit it with some rust, some streaking, some chipping, and then it's just kind of all better again. I will make some of that skin tone I was telling you about. So we've got that gore grunta. If we mix some white with it, we're getting something like a sort of a semi darker skin tone here. We'll just plop this here. Faces, hands. And then I will go in. I think actually the life vests were not. I think it was the Italian ships where the life vests were in really, really bright color. And I mean a really bright one. Let's get our front gun mount here. Officers. Let's take a look and see what we've got here when it comes to gear. Yeah, kind of a grayish, kind of a gray. On the lighter side. And you can see I'm just sort of mixing my own gray right here. Bluish gray. Let's hit these life vests. Remember, I'm thinking about this as a whole, not each individual guy here, because we can go back in. But let's say you need to get this thing out on the table real fast, just for a game, and then you can put it back on the little holder like this again and paint it some more. There's nothing that says it all has to be painted all at the same time or all at once. That's how a lot of my armies are. Sometimes I'll paint part of it and then play with it for a bit and then paint some more. You can see I'm starting to darken down some of these things using that same gray here, kind of scumbling that in. Might even throw a little bit of that onto the crates here, and some of the barrels. Already thinking about, basically, it's almost like getting some dirt on the deck here. There's some dirty footprints. Seems to be a whole lot of activity there anyways. Maybe even a darker blue here then for your dungarees on these lads out here that are not locked up in a machine gun mount somewhere. Now we will still, I think in that next segment, we'll do some rust effects on these things. Oh heck, I might even throw some glazes over the machine gun mounts here so that we can go back in with a finer brush. This is what I meant about saying, you know what, the heck with it. I'm going to go with some glazing over the top of this and we'll rework these with that finer brush later. Because we used to do the whole start with the thing being black and work your way up and little by little, and that just took forever. And then I sort of stumbled across this method of shading and such in advance instead of, again, starting out with that black. Just gonna darken these down again. we will take this same, see, we got some of that brown liner in there. Let's water that down, make a glaze out of that, and then we can go over this winch over here. I'm sure it's got to be something for yanking this vessel off the shore, off the beach. See that? You're able to not just restore some of the darks there, but now they have a little different tone to them. Changing the, again, putting a few little darks on those. We're going to hit these crates here. All depends on, well, do you feel like people can actually see this? It was really tough to see it on the reference pictures. Now I'm going to just go even more with the brown liner here, and we'll do some more glazes on these. We've been adding lighter colors. Now it's time to almost kind of go in the opposite direction here with a little bit of dark. There we go. And I can, now I just sort of mop up some of the extra. And now we start to think about, in addition to that, some more of the weathering and streaking. All of a sudden, those skin tones that looked so bright and noticeable, those start to subside. I'm going to do a little bit of that on the mast here. Let's darken that down. This is not the sort of traditional sort of watercolor type glaze. This is, sometimes I call it a dry glaze or whatever. But see what we're doing here on these different mounts. Let's do that here on this one. It's watery, but it's not that watercolor type thing where it's just going to sink down and ooze all over the place. So you can see right there we just gave that a little extra shading as it goes back here towards whatever these are. You can even do some of this. These are some darker streaks here, and we'll get into this more, but usually where you have something like this where there's either a portal or something here, the water kind of collects there and then sort of then streaks down. But I don't need any special glaze because I can just make my own here. Just gonna scumble that in and wipe some of it away. At this point, a lot of it is just, say, some Leviathan blue and some touch of that brown liner. Again, here on the deck, so that, I think that's going to set up our next phase, which is going to be stuff like your weathering, your rust. We doing a little bit of an introductory version of it here. See again that some of that darker streaking. This is where we start to get a little separation between, say, the deck and those gun mounts. And again, that's the brown liner there. It's thinned down. Even you can start to see there's a little bit of scumbling going on where you can see almost some dots there. So it's not just a soft version of that. Here, let's do a little more of that because I think you'll be able to see it here. So now I'm just sort of sticking the brush down in there, getting rid of some of the extra stuff and swiping some of that away. And we'll do, like I said, we're going to do some rust effects on this, some chipping and such. And we'll just get to that right about now. So I'll be right back in just a second with some of your weathering. Let's get into some weathering here. And you saw me using one of these sponges here earlier. Just a makeup sponge, nothing fancy. You see when we rip that, all those little particles here, very uneven, but they're relatively fine, and I just basically tear this in a few little different shapes, like so. And then what we'll do is we are going to take some of that gore grunter fur there. Okay, it's nice to have a little bit of, I would say, red liner in here, but let's go with, let's see how. Now, actually, I'm going to just throw a little bit of this. So just clear red. Something we can also use on making some more skin tone. Let's just get a little touch of that out there. And we're going to make ourselves a couple of different rust colors. We're going to make some darker rust. We're even going to throw a little bit of the Leviathan blue out here. This will be our darkest rust color here. More so the chipping phase of this. So there's something nice and dark there. Then we'll take our sponges. I'm going to make it even smaller here. And we've got our, now you can see the little separate areas on that. Let's now get rid of some of the excess there. Gonna go after some of these leading edges like this. Just along the edges. Not so much along the sides. Trying to think about, okay, where are the areas where the most wear is going to happen? Obviously along here, I would say. And as always, too much is too much. And it can get to be too much so darn fast. Just unbelievably fast. What's a little fun weathering becomes, well, what the heck did this thing just get sunk or whatever? Why is there so much chipping and damage everywhere? Obviously, it's a combat vessel with certain connotations. And I'm trying to line this up, as you can see, with where some of my staining is. So there's a rhyme and a reason to this. It may not seem like it. It may seem all we're doing is just tap, tap, tap in here with a sponge with a bunch of dark paint on it. But like I said, we are focused on areas where you're just going to have more contact with the surface. Even here, there's an edge there. Now there are much more. You could do the chipping medium and the hairspray techniques and that sort of thing too. It just is, what is it that you want out of it? For this, I'm really just trying to show, to get the most from the least. To try and get in something like this, unlike say the Higgins boats or whatever, this is sort of the centerpiece of your fleet, but yet maybe you don't want to spend tons and tons of time on it. So how do you get something that's a centerpiece to still be somewhat impressive? Just gonna, like I said, we'll focus in on these edges here, where we just think, and see, the more we tap this, the finer that gets, and at this tiny scale, finer is definitely better. There's where boats tie up regularly, that's another place where you're going to get a whole lot of chipping and the rusting and that sort of thing. Don't really get to go downtown to the lakefront too much anymore, but I can remember seeing a lot of boats that are tied up there, and you can kind of tell where they're tied up all the time, because boy, paint really takes a beating there as the waves move that boat up and down and up and down and pushing it towards the shore. And even though there's tires or something there to keep it from contacting the shore directly, it still tends to get worn down a bit. We're going to do some here on these. Certainly some more down here by our winches. On the stern here. And it's not like we can't just take the same lighter color paint that we used here and go back over that and maybe take some of it away or whatever. Let's add just a couple more of these along the rims of the gun mounts. Doesn't all have to be done with the sponge. I know Green Stuff World, they also have some sponges that are used for this. You can use, what is that, the carrying case foam, right? So now what we can do is we've sort of laid out the generic areas where we want those to go. We can maybe connect those a bit, give them a little more structure. Who knows, maybe even make them a little bigger in some spots. Especially in the areas where we want to focus those. Again, here where we've got the most of our weathering. There might have been areas where it was just too hard to reach with the foam. Or areas we wanted to just be a little bit tighter with. Like along there. Now here, it was just too hard to get the sponge down in there. So this is it's called a liner brush. You can see it's got that same little narrow tip on it, but because the bristles are so much longer, it holds more paint, but also lets me get into some of these trickier areas. You can see we're going to do that same sort of a glaze thing here, where we throw some of it down and then take some of it away. And this is that darker rust mix. Now let's say if you don't want to mix rust colors, you can use the Secret Weapon weathering paints. I love those. Those work great. Heck, I could even be using them right now, but I've used them so much, I need to get some new ones. They're basically gone. And I would say if you're looking for the Secret Weapon equivalent to the color that we made, probably Old Rust That's the darkest of them, and then you go to things like the red rust, then the orange rust and yellow rust, and I think you don't need me to explain that. It's kind of obvious where I'm going with that. Just like I did before. Let's grab a little more, just the, say, the brown liner here. Gonna give them, well, some footwear. We're also gonna sneak in here with those glazes I was telling you about. Now see how that's right up there against the bridge, and then we sort of pull that out. But because I have my different colors, see this has a little maybe more rust to it. See, not the whole process doesn't have to be, it's not all just down and dirty, or we're just slapping paint around and pushing it around and all that. There can be times where you're, oh look, using a smaller brush, using a more delicate approach. It's just probably better if you do that towards the end rather than starting that way at the beginning, because that's what's going to extend your working time by a whole lot, probably. See what that just did right there? Gave that a little bit of separation, and then we go in here and we pull away some of that glaze, push it around. Heck, we can even start to think about putting some of our rust color in there while the water is still there. Look at that. See what that just did? The separation that gives us there. But now let's not make the entire ship like that, because then it does start to become more of a rust bucket than an active duty ship. And there may be times where you just go back in again with your regular paint and say, oh, you know what, we went a little bit too far with our rust in that spot. Nothing wrong with taking some of it away. And we can do that. Let's get some of our mint green out here again. Like that. And let's say, well, we did too much right here. I can actually get a little bit more of my darker tone in there, but let's go. See, we take some of that away now. Let's say you get a watermark or whatever, and you say, oh my gosh, I got a watermark. Not a problem. So we're just going to go back in here with our original color, and as it takes some of it away, so we kind of scumble away at that. And you could spend a whole long time on this. You could spend 10 hours painting one of these if you want, if you're looking for super detail. I would certainly, for myself, want to spend at least another hour more or so than I can in this video here, because I'm not going to make this a 4-hour video. But it does at least give you the idea of some of the principles involved. And see, now that we've got some weathering on that, we can start to take out some of these, some of the structure here, these racks for the life rafts here. I'll take some of my rust color here, and again, because we've got some of that gore grunta in there, gives it just a touch of transparency, almost like it is one of those oil paint washes. I do the same thing. I say we pull that along. We do the same thing over here. That's why I wasn't really obsessing over making a huge difference between, say, the shading and the blue colors here where we had the mounts end and the deck begin. We also have some rust that we can start to work with here, and we're doing our darkest rust first, and obviously it's going to be originating where the chipping is. That's why we did the chipping first. Making sure this is as transparent as we can make it. Let's make sure we have, and there's a portal here too, so that's not a bad place again to have some form of weathering there. Right over here, look, again, it's all very transparent. It's focused up against the edge of where the deck is going to meet the superstructure. I can even use my hand there to blend some of that. You can see that we start to grab more of that. Well, again, using the secret weapon equivalent, something like the red rust, as opposed to the old rust. We're starting out with the old rust because that's the darker. And just gonna sneak in some out from these portholes here. Trying to make each one of those a different length. Where are we at here? And we can go lighter and lighter with this rust. Once again, I'm going to focus right here. So we'll draw that down. Because there's a reason for the rust to be there. Well, again, transparent. As we draw this down, you can see the paint underneath it. And as I said, I can always go back in there and tone some of that down if I think it's just too much. And always, I'm going back with some water. I suppose, use, say, the Lamian medium or the contrast medium or the Green Stuff World Master medium or any other medium instead of water. The more I messed around with the mediums, I did like them. They were kind of neat. Some of them are different. Say the Lamian medium is a very thin one, whereas the Green Stuff World Master medium was a much thicker one. That seemed to be more handy in the early phases, and the Lamian medium being more of a fine, thin. It was more like this, the same way we're using our water here. Let's get our anchor. Have that come down, and this is the fun part where you have some of the rust goes over, or some of the streaks, I guess I should say, not just necessarily rust, but streaks go over those numbers. Makes it a little bit less like they've just been decaled on there. It makes them look more like a part of the ship instead of just a decal. And I'm going to say here, you gotta have some heavy duty weathering here for sure. And you can see that I alternate. Now, eventually we start to take a lighter and lighter rust mix and throw that around here. Oh, let's grab some of that. And thinking about where these things are meeting the deck, that's probably where water would accumulate and maybe then some rust. Let's get ourselves now something lighter. So we're going to take even more of that's our orange, our clear orange from Reaper. Because we also want to have some streaks that go down through here, and this is where that lighter color is really going to show up. I'll even along the upper surface of that ridge there. I think you can see how that's working there. And then when we use it on our lighter blue over here, that really does. You can see how that starts to show up. But let's do some smaller ones here. We've done a lot of larger things. As far as the rust and all that goes, I think we need to focus more on some smaller things. And I may go back in and take away a lot of these, the rust that I added here. Maybe I'd just say it's a little too much here, it's a little too much there. I can see what the effect of that lighter rust does here by our number. And again now, trying to find some areas on the lower section of our hull where that's going to work. And give us it'll stand out real nice. That depends. Do I really want to extend some of this, the porthole rust here all the way down? Not sure. Let's get some across our stern here. Just going to add a little more, some water to that. And now we have this suggestion again of lighter rust color on there. Maybe even along the top edges of the gun mounts. And here's another example of how that glazed worked there and just sort of naturally sinks. Well, now you start to see, okay, well, that's where the rainwater would go or the salt water, whatever, and sort of collect and start eating away some of the paint. I could go even with a finer brush than this to make those finer rust lines. But we're already about 100 minutes into this, maybe ish. We're darn close to that. I do want to try and get to some other additional things, say like the crew, trying to drop a few lighter tones on their face or something like that. and bring out the life jackets. Because me just endlessly doing rust is, well, after a while you say, okay, yeah, we see how to do that. I just want to get to some of the lighter rust areas like this now. Talked about say a finer brush. We can look for one of those here. Now we've got ourselves a much lighter rust color. Let's see how that's going to work. Can line up even more for some of these spots right there. See, not much of it. We'll just do one or two, like right here. Let's focus on one maybe right here. See how that stands out a little bit more? And I'll just keep finding some small areas here where I can use some of this lighter version of my rust color. I'm really going to focus on that. Let's see what we can do up here. Up in this area. See if we can't find some places that we can utilize this lighter version of our rust. Something just tells me up here by the anchor, not a bad spot to try that. But I just have to constantly keep in mind that too much is too much. I even water it down every once in a while. Let's see what we can do in here. Again, just looking for a few spots you can see how transparent it is because we're using, well, basically the clear orange. We're using the Gorgrunt to further the contrast paint, and that's going to also be on the thinner side, more transparent. Lower side of the hull doing the same thing. Maybe even a few that originate not necessarily from an edge. And then let's say there's times where it just seems like it's too much or whatever. Well, we can take some of our original mix of that light bluish gray and we can go the other way now. And we can even tone down. Let's see here, that's too much of the dark. Well, we can go over the top of that. Right here we have a little bit of a funky edge there. This is where we can clean that sort of stuff up. That's why I like to just do that down and dirty stuff sorry, early on. And then go back later and just as much as is necessary, do some cleanup on that. Let's see if we can't. We got lots of beat up stuff along the edge here. Let's see if we can also lighten that edge just a bit. And that's an awful lot of rust pouring out of that portal there. Let's see if we can't cut that down somewhat. See, so it's still there, but maybe not quite so prominent. Again, the goal is not to make this be a rust bucket, just make it look like it has some weathering to it. And this is where we're just going over that with those translucent mixes. See here, we can do the same thing. We don't wipe out the rust effects and such that we added. But look at this, we can just tone those down ever so slightly. And even in this mix, there's a little bit of the contrast paint in here that also helps keep it transparent. Just keep working our way around here. So I see it. There we go. Now I've got another little situation over here. I'm going to turn it this way. Ah, good. You can see that. And that just got to be a little bit too solid. So you can see we're going in here now. Just like we did before on the deck and on the sides of the hull. Just doing a little bit of cleanup work right there. Same on the mast. But I think you can see that we continue with those vertical brushstrokes. Just maintaining that. I don't want to call them necessarily directional strokes. That's something we use a lot in regular miniature painting. But when you actually have the big old flat surfaces like this, in some ways it becomes even more important. And then, say for things like this, where you've got this rack, we're going to leave the interior be darker. Obviously, that would have had to been a brass etched part or something like that for those cages to be hollow. Here's another situation where just needs some cleanup. And then in our last segment, we're going to start to mess around with your gun mounts here, with the actual gun crews. Because we had thrown those darker glazes over the top of those. And now we're going to work back the opposite way. And you can see how some of what was there originally still shows through. These are... I know most people don't think of a lighter color as being a glaze, but that's definitely a thing. I remember when we sort of discovered that on accident, that yeah, you can do a lighter color as a glaze, and that became sort of a big advantage there. We thought, kind of like everybody else, well, glaze it's this darker thing that you put over the top to get more shadows and that sort of thing. And then we realized, well, no, it works great on, say, skin tones especially. Lots of things that it is very helpful for. And all this does, see, there was just a bunch of dots there that didn't really make sense. Yeah, you want your chipping and stuff, but that just seemed to be a weird place for it. So I went ahead and made the change on that. Get some of this rust here. Gets toned down. Let's see what we've got going here with our barrels. Those are just sort of dark right now. We need something more on those. And then maybe let's get some metal strapping here on your boxes. And don't be shy about just taking your finger and using that to do some blending. Why not? And sometimes it's fun to just take the original color of the hull and you go in and you actually maybe take away some of the via ship ID number there, like it's been worn away. I do that even with vehicles too. Like I said before, there's There's going to be the other two Cruel Seas videos. So when you get to the end of this, there's going to be an actual link you can click on screen, and then I'll try and link you to some other bolt action things and some vehicle painting where you'll see the same principles apply, whether it's Italian M1341 or a Sharpie or whatever. Obviously not the usual vehicle painting steps that you see. And sometimes as I do those, I think, well, okay, why would you want to just see if 10 painters essentially have the same approach to painting, say, a vehicle or whatever, they use those same 15 steps, do I really need to watch these videos? Because when I first started to paint them myself, I was watching videos how to do it, especially because, well, I saw these different materials being used, and I'd never used those before. And then it sort of seemed like an NFL coaching tree. One person did this video, and these other people watched it, and they all basically did the exact same thing. Maybe little different tweaks here and there, but was it really that groundbreakingly different one from the next? It was all kind of similar. I said, no, I think there's got to maybe be another way of approaching this. Something maybe that works for those of us that need to be working on more than one thing at a time. Because I work on lots of things at one time. And actually one of my Patreon series, series 2, that was my winter Soviets. I was working on those in oils. Well, Soviet armies, there's 5-6 squads of a dozen guys. So you need to be able to execute things quickly, but you still want, well, a decent result. You can see how this blue changes a little bit from here to there. And what we'll do is we'll call this phase, we'll just say this is good for right now, because you definitely want to get to the crew and such here. What we'll do is we'll make this reference bigger again and see what that shows us. So yeah, officers definitely need some white hats. We got to get some grayish blue on helmets, and even some more darks in places. So what we're gonna do, we'll throw some more fresh paint on the palette, and we'll get to our crew next. Let's get down to our crew members a little bit here. Got some of the blue liner back. I'm going to mix in right here some of that maggot white. Now it becomes more of a, see how it's a bluish gray color. Let's hit some of these helmets here. What I'm actually going to do, I'm going to try and see if I can't zoom in a touch or two for you here to make sure the focus is still okay. And the idea here is to also hit some parts like that magazine right there. Now we do have a couple officers. We got to give them, obviously, not helmets, but we'll do the white hat like we saw in our reference picture. I really enjoy the blue liner mixed with that off-white. It makes a real interesting gray. It's a little bit cooler. Actually, the same maggot white mixed with brown liner also makes an interesting warm gray. This guy here actually has a helmet in his hands over here by his side, so maybe we'll just give him the typical white sailor hat too, just for the heck of it. So some more crew, more gun crew back here. Well, I was tempted to do the actual guns here in, I wasn't going to say metallic, but maybe just make them darker overall. Now let's get a little bit of action on some of these life vests here. Like I said, then we'll go into some skin tones. We'll get into the blue of their uniform shirts, because remember we did those glazes over the top of that toned it down. See, we have plenty of leeway here as far as maybe adding a little bit more of a light color on the top of the helmets. If that ends up being too light, I can always do another little glaze on it, knock it down. That is just the best part of when you do that approach. It gives you a little more flexibility instead of constantly layering from the darkest color to the lightest colors. Even there, getting a little bit of change in some of my grays, because it's painted that color, but when you have something that's a few hundred feet long, the sea, the weather, the sun, all that stuff is going to impact it. I just look at, we have a little soul and it's black, and just the salt, and over the few years of just being in the city, this is an urban environment, and it had some really weird effects on some of the colors. That happens. There's some folks that say, well, I have a paint chip and I know exactly what they did. Well, yeah, that paint chip is fabulous, and if the vehicle just stayed in your house the entire time, well, then that paint chip would be fantastic as far as accuracy of color. But since it didn't, it's not going to quite have the impact you thought it might. Sometimes you just have to say, well, okay, this is sort of what would happen in nature here to this. Now we got a couple of guys that have their binoculars there, trying to get a little hint of a glint of sunlight on those. Just trying to pick up a few lighter areas on the guns there. Now I've got my skin tone over here. I just made, and we'll see what we can find. It's tough. I can even, I'll try and find even a smaller brush than this to do some of these. I also trying to use the length of the bristles here to try and work into some of these tighter areas. Like there, I'm desperately trying to get a little hint of skin tone where I can. Let's see if we can't locate ourselves something a little bit smaller. Let's see what this is. Actually quadruple zero. Let's see if that helps. Might have to get some fresh maggot white out here too. That can happen with the palette. Oh, and by the way, this is it's a homemade wet palette. I think I've talked about these before. Oh, it is just a Chinese food container. Chamois sponge. Obviously, you soak that. And then it's actually a decent quality parchment paper over the top of that. And the nice thing is that those Chinese food containers, well, it's a food container. It's designed to seal, which means that it holds in the moisture well. And I've noticed, because my wife has, she has one of the store-bought wet palettes, and I notice how often she has to clean that darn thing before it gets all, what would you say, was that the mold and everything and smelling weird? Well, this really doesn't do that, which has been a huge surprise to me, that in some ways it's just more effective than these, well, fancy store-bought palettes, for lack of a better term. Let's get some of that lighter blue of the uniform shirts here. That's the clear blue. We're using some of our lighter hull mix, and let's dive in here and do some shirts. And it's pretty interesting that in some cases, our biggest color accents on this is actually that the crew themselves, the tiniest little things on here, like the crew, in a way have more color on them. And I might go one step lighter than after I throw this on. It's mostly just sleeves, but those did get a whole lot darker when we did those glazes. It was designed to get down into those recesses and crevices that'll be a little bit tougher to reach. So now I'll just go into my maggot white here, and let's see if we can't find ourselves a nice lighter blue here, but I gotta make sure. See, this is more of a reddish blue. The hull is more of a greenish blue. Even though it's lighter, I want to keep it distinguishing some kind of difference between those two blues. Let's see if we can't manage that. I know I'm rotating this around pretty fast. I hope you can see what it is that's going on. And if I remember right, it's been a little while since I assembled these. I am pretty sure that the crew, or the gun crews here, are just all one piece. Which that can make it a little bit difficult for cleaning these things and trying to get rid of those mold lines and burrs and some of the other stuff that can happen with metal. And at a certain point, then maybe you say things. Okay, this is done. This is as much as I want to do on this, or you just keep on going. But the important thing is you've got it potentially ready to throw out there on the table, play some games with it, run a few scenarios. Especially if it's a new fleet. Now that I didn't have that choice with my 1944 Monte Cassino themed Fallschirmjägers, because that was for a tournament for Operation Sting, and basically I never had a chance to play test those or do anything with them until the tournament itself. Heck, I wasn't even entirely sure if I was going to have an order dice to match, or a unit to match order dice. I was convinced that I would get there and find that, oh, yeah, you're short one unit here to match that order dice. That was not ideal circumstances, to say the least. The tournament actually did go pretty well, though. I was very surprised. I really thought that wasn't going to be a happy circumstance, not having practiced with it or anything in advance. I'm just going to find myself a few of these little lights in here. But then at the same time, I go, you know what? I need a dark there. And it's perfectly fine to go back and forth like that. I know some folks, they get really surprised and say, well, wait a minute, you're working back into this area again. Why are you doing highlights again? Usually you're doing more glazes at this point. Well, yeah, usually, but every single project is different. You never quite know what it is you're going to need to do. And here I'm just seeing areas that I want to clean up a little bit. They got darker than I think I wanted them to be. And to me, that just adds a little more depth to it. It makes this tiny little 1/350 scale at least have maybe a hint of believability that it is hundreds of feet long and not just several inches long. Maybe even got myself a lighter color here. It might even do a little bit of, see, right there. Not too much, not a whole lot, but an indication that the edge is being caught by the light there. I will throw out another hint of my mint green here so I can do some more stuff. I also have my yellow over here. We can maybe do some final cleanup work here on our life rafts, because now we're not working around those, not quite in danger of hitting certain surfaces. And I'm gonna throw, I never did put white out in the palette, just using my maggot white as my white. I'm gonna mix that with our yellow. It's gonna make it just a little bit brighter. So this top edge here can catch a little more light as it should. Gonna maybe go into this sepia liner over here, see if I can't do something with these crates. Maybe the slightest indication of boards or wood or texture of some kind. They're that huge. And some texture is better than no texture. I'm going to turn this around and we'll do the same. The other side here, if I can reach it. I know it's hard to see. Maybe we'll go up one more step here in our indication of boards. And be good with that. One more shot of a lighter yellow here on the top edges of the life rafts. Then just sort of leave it. We're back in here with our mint green. I want to get a few lights in places here. And some of these, they sort of got darkened and weathered an awful lot, but it also sort of killed some of the shading on them. I don't want it to be too flat, so yeah, that helps a lot. Just sometimes a little touch like that is all it takes to make a big difference. And maybe a few areas on the deck because it does catch some light. See, we're using a little bit of that stippled textured approach. I guess just to show that it gets walked on quite a bit. It sees a lot of activity. Now these straps on the crates here, which could just be wood over wood. I realize that, but maybe here a little difference in texture. On the side of this mounter, let's get a little bit of a lighter color in some places. And by lighter, it's nowhere near white. Catch a few glints of light maybe on our machine gun. What I assume are barrels down there. I mean, that's what they have to be. I'm just can't imagine they're anything else. Look back for a few highlights on that winch. Maybe a couple of lighter, just like we did on the upper surfaces of these things here on the top parts of the mounts. And you see they're not one continuous line, they're broken. Whether that's by some form of chipping or rust or both. And now I'm going to go along the edge of some of these guys here too. Not wanting to wipe out all of the chipping and rust, but sort of working our way around that. I want to see if I can get a few lines in here too. Because we did plenty of weathering, now we're just going to go back the other way and reverse some of that weathering. And some more here. Let's lighten this up a touch. Maybe even parts of our mast. And the bridge here. Let's see what we can do to maybe... We've got our officers up here. Let's see if I can't sneak in a couple of more skin tone things. I think that's supposed to be a hand there. Yeah, we kind of somehow lost the face on that one. Now hopefully, again, it gives you guys some ideas here, things that you can do. And as always, you take it as far as you want to or not. Maybe you don't even do the things that I was doing here. Maybe you stop where we were an hour ago because that's all you wanted to do. maybe you keep going from here and do a lot more. Thanks again for watching this if you've gone all the way through. And I do a lot of live sessions. Now obviously we're in more of a holiday period right here. I don't think I will be doing one on Christmas, but there's lots of plenty of those that I've done. You can go and check those out. And if you want notifications for any time I do go live or whatever, do the subscribe thing, but then hit the all notifications bell or whatever. That was the mistake that I made. I would subscribe to people and not click on the bell, and like weeks or even months after they'd released the video, I go, wait a minute, how did I not see this? And it was because, yeah, I hadn't done the click on the all notifications. I do actually have some bolt action battle reports. There's 4 of them up there already. We're going to obviously keep doing more. And as soon as I can get a pair of opposing fleets done, I've got the Italian fleet done. I think once I can get a British fleet going, then we can try and do some Cruel Seas battle reports. I also want to try and do some terrain videos for Cruel Seas. I'm just intrigued at the idea of doing some kind of water thing or coastal things. More than just buildings, something that looks natural, but is more than just some rocks. Something that can be made out of materials that aren't expensive and relatively quickly. I always love a new type of terrain challenge, and I think Cruel Seas fits the bill for that. So there you have, there's your US LCI, your landing craft. Let's see if I can't make that one reference a little bit bigger here. I'm going to zoom out. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Even make that a little smaller out of the way. So there we have it. Now, like I said, this number here, I could bring that up more if I wanted to, knock it down, whatever. You got your crew on there, some weathering. Well, thanks again for watching, everybody, and I'll catch you on the next painting Cruel Seas.